Hello all, welcome to Lucid Main's Current Affairs program brought to you by New IAS, and today we will be discussing about Startup India. Startup India is a flagship initiative of the Government of India launched on January 16, 2016, which is intended to build a strong ecosystem for nurturing innovation and startups in the country that will drive sustainable economic growth, generate large-scale employment opportunities, and to bring about more research and development that is found severely lacking in India. The government through this initiative aims to empower startups to grow through the innovation and design, and implicit within the initiative is to bring about a change from job seeking to job providing. Now the implementing agency for Startup India is the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, that is the DIPP, under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. The coverage of Startup India extends from digital or technology sector to a wide array of sectors including agriculture startups, manufacturing startups, social sector startups, healthcare sector startups and education startups. It plans on extension from existing Tier 1 metropolitan cities such as New Delhi, Mumbai or Bangalore to Tier 2 cities such as Surat, Pune, Amritsar and Tier 3 cities including semi-urban and rural areas which are not so developed as compared to Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities. Startup India is about creating prosperity in India. Many enterprising people who dream of starting their own business lack the resources to do so. As a result, their ideas, talents and capabilities remain untapped and the country loses out on wealth creation, economic growth and employment. Like I said before, implicit within the initiative is to bring about a change from job seeking to job providing. Now, what is a startup? As per the Startup India scheme, a startup means an entity which is registered in India not prior to 5 years and has an annual turnover not exceeding 25 crore rupees in any preceding financial year, and it is working towards innovation, development, deployment or commercialization of new products, processes or services driven by technology or intellectual property. An entity shall cease to be a startup if it is found by splitting up or reconstruction of a business already in existence. Consider the case of splitting of the Reliance Industries. It was never an original idea, but two new managements came into existence. These two new entities can never be considered as a startup. The idea behind the startup company should be new, innovative and original. Next, if the startup's turnover for the previous financial year has exceeded 25 crore rupees, then it ceases to be a startup. If it has completed 5 years from the date of incorporation or registration, then also it ceases to be a startup. Further, the startup shall be eligible for tax benefits only after it has obtained certification from the interministerial board set up for this purpose. The startups need to have interministerial board certificate to avail tax benefits, like I mentioned right now, and the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion (DIP) created the interministerial board to validate startups for the tax related benefits, and the interministerial board comprises of the following members of the DIPP from Ministry of Corporate Affairs, from Ministry of Information Technology and Department of Biotechnology, RBI, SEBI, etc. Now the Startup India Action Plan. In order to meet the objectives of Startup India, the Government of India has announced this action plan that addresses all aspects of the startup ecosystem. With this action plan, the government hopes to accelerate spreading of the startup movement from digital or technology sector to a wide array of sectors including agriculture, manufacturing, social sector, healthcare and education, etc. Accelerate the spreading of startup movement from the existing Tier 1 cities to Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities including the semi-urban and rural areas. The action plan is divided across the following areas. First is simplification and handholding. It is the provision of careful support or guidance to someone during a learning process or a period of change. A compliance regime based on self-certification, legal support and fast-track patent examination at lower cost, faster exit for startups, etc. These are the examples for simplifications and handholding. Second is funding support and incentives. Government provides funding support through a fund of fund corpus with rupees 10,000 crore and a credit guarantee fund for startups and tax exemption to startups for up to 3 years. Next is the industry and academia partnership and incubation harnesses private sector expertise for incubator setup and building innovation centers at national institutes. Now, the Startup India action plan consists of the following. One is the Startup India Hub, and Startup India Hub will be created as a single point of contact for the entire startup ecosystem to enable knowledge exchange and access to funding. And next is the self-certification. This self-certification will apply to laws like payment of gratuity, contract labours, employees provident fund, water and pollution acts. Next is rolling out of mobile app and portal to serve as a single platform for startups for interacting with government and regulatory institutions for all the business needs and information exchange among various stakeholders. Next we come to patent protection to promote awareness and adoption of intellectual property rights by startups and facilitate them in protecting and commercializing the intellectual property rights by providing access to high quality intellectual property services and resources, including fast track examination of patent applications and rebates and fees. Next we come to simplifying the startup process. A startup will be able to set up by just filling up a short form through a mobile app and online portal. A mobile app was launched through which startups can be registered in a day. There will also be a portal for clearances, approvals and registrations. Next is faster exit for startups. Given the innovative nature of startups, a significant percentage fail to succeed. In the event of a business failure, it is critical to reallocate capital and resources to more productive avenues, and accordingly a swift and simple process has been used for startups to wind up operations or exiting for startups. Next is the credit guarantee fund, which I mentioned before also. The credit guarantee fund for startups would help flow of venture debt from the banking system to the startups by standing guarantee against risk. A national credit guarantee trust company is being envisaged with a budgetary allocation of rupees 500 crore per year for the next 4 years. Basically, the aim is to guarantee credit for startups. Also, there is a fund of funds with a corpus of rupees 10,000 crores in order to provide funding support to startups, and the government will set up a fund with an initial corpus of rupees 2,500 crore and a total corpus of 10,000 crore over 4 years. The fund would be managed by private professionals and drawn from industries, while Life Insurance Corporation will be a co-investor in the fund. Now, the startups will be exempted from capital gains tax. Currently, the investments by venture capital funds in startups are exempted from this law. Now, the same is being extended to investments made by incubators in startups. From now on, the incubators in startups will also be exempt from capital gains tax. A capital gains tax or a long-term capital gains tax is a tax on profits from the sale of an asset held for more than a year. Next, income tax exemption for startups. To promote the growth of startups and addressing working capital requirements, startups will be exempted from income tax. The government has also launched Atal Innovation Mission to serve as a platform for promotion of world-class innovation hubs, startup businesses and other self-employment activities, particularly in technology-driven areas. There is also a plan for setting up of 35 new incubators in institutions. A public-private partnership model is being considered for 35 new incubators and 31 innovation centers at national institutes. Innovation-focused programs for students to foster a culture of innovation in the field of science and technology among students is also one aspect of the Startup India action plan, and an annual grand challenge to support creation of successful world-class incubators in India. Now, it is not important to remember all these aspects of the action plan. It is only for understanding purpose that it is being explained. So, we move on to next aspect as to why India needs startups. Now, startups are essential to bridge the gaps to enhance growth and development of the country on various fronts. New startup innovations that are cropping up are steady source of income for the entrepreneur and an addition to the GDP of the country. Hence, the government aspires to boost startups at the grassroots levels. India's demographic dividend is conducive to startups and has high potential for it. For every unique need of every segment of population, there's opportunity for new ventures or new startups. Startups hold the potential for creating more jobs at a time when the manufacturing sector is facing a slump. India suffers from a spectre of jobless growth. That is, India has sufficient growth rate, but there's not much job creation. If India has to grow at double digit and provide more jobs, schemes like Make in India, Skill India have to be successful, and Startup India provides the required driving force for all these schemes to be successful, as well as improve the growth rate and provide the much needed jobs for the burgeoning population. More number of entrepreneurs means more competition, which saves the country from monopoly in any field. This will force companies to come up with newer and more cost-effective ideas in order to secure profit margins and build a base which are beneficial to the customers. Basically, if one company is monopolizing in any field or every field, they will have the power to dictate the prices, and the customers will be forced to buy at whatever price they offer. Basically, it goes against the dictum that the customer is supreme. Now, there are huge number of venture capitalists who want to invest in startups, but because of the lack of completely original idea, they fail to find one. The world of investors see potential in our country, and we need to use all this attention coming our way in a positive manner. Now, a venture capitalist is an investor who either provides capital to startup ventures or supports small companies that wish to expand but do not have access to equity markets. Now, venture capitalists are willing to invest in such companies because they can earn a massive return on their investments if these companies are a success. Now, venture capitalists also experience major losses when their investment fail, but these investors are typically wealthy enough that they can afford to take the risks associated with funding young and unproven companies that appear to have great idea and great management team. Next, we need to see the shortfalls in the Startup India scheme. Few states have complied to its provisions. For example, the exemption from examination of startups for the first 3 years has not been implemented all over India. The division of startup into innovative and non-innovative group, subsequently the innovative ones getting special privileges, is affecting the overall health of startups. Now, the fund set up by the government is not enough to cater the needs of all sections of the entrepreneurs. Under this scheme, the banks only puts in 15% of the total corpus, while it is the venture capitalists that have to bring the remaining 85% to the table. And this year, the venture capitalists have struggled to raise that kind of money, and as a result, the funding has reduced considerably. Now, the setting up of startups also requires a recommendation from an incubator set up by the government or an incubator supported by any postgraduate institution like the IAS in Bangalore. And this step, that is the need for validation and recommendation, goes against the very steps the action plan takes to reduce government involvement. That is, this brings about an additional layer of bureaucracy, and this additional layer of bureaucracy could slow down the starting up process, and this has to go for faster implementation and coming about of startups. Now the tax laws also need some more clarifications and simplification. Tax exemptions to startups hasn't done much benefit to a large extent, as the startups have to pay minimum alternate tax to the government. Now a minimum alternate tax was introduced to tax companies making high profits and declare dividends to their shareholders but have no significant taxable income because of exemptions, deductions and incentives. The intent of introducing minimum alternate tax was to ensure that no taxpayer with substantial income can avoid tax liability by using exclusions, deductions and incentives. Now we will do an analysis into the Startup India 2 years after it was brought about. It was introduced in January 2016 and now we are entering into the third year of Startup India scheme. So we will see how it has fared so far. First is job creation. Now empirical evidence has shown that there is a very strong link between startups, especially small startup enterprises, and job growth in India. India's employment growth in the manufacturing startup sector has displayed some underappreciated facts. One is that much of the employment growth has come in from small enterprises, accounting for over 80% of jobs in the manufacturing startup sector. The rate of startups in the small and medium enterprises has increased in the tradable sector but contracted or decreased in the non-tradable sector. Now the tradable sector of a country's economy is made up of industry sectors whose output is in terms of goods and services are traded internationally or could be traded internationally given a plausible variation in relative prices. Most commonly the tradable sectors consist largely of sectors of the manufacturing industries, while the non-tradable sector consists of locally rendered services including health, education, retail and construction. So basically the rate of startups in the small and medium sector has increased in the tradable sector but decreased in the non-tradable sector. It may not be surprising that manufacturing employment growth has followed from improved connectivity and trade reforms. The degree of imbalance towards small and medium enterprises is too strong to ignore, and globalization has promoted the growth of small and medium enterprises. Next is the rate of new startups. Indian government is considering startups as the new engine of employment generation and economic growth. Startups are making news nowadays and are gaining popularity within India. Their number is increasing day by day. A comparison of new business registration density in India with the rest of the world confirms that the number of startups in India is low, although it is trended upwards and has improved. There is also a huge heterogeneity in the spatial distribution of startups within India. These startups are highly concentrated in metropolitan cities. Startup is a new dimension added to the characteristics of our major cities. The two key factors that predict the startup rate are local education levels and the quality of local physical infrastructure. Now the first one, the local education level, the human capital, especially that of education, is more important for startups, and the education improves skills and spreads ideas faster and wider. Because of the strong link between human capital and entrepreneurship, policymakers should remove any constraint that restrict the growth in the quality and quantity of local education institutions. Next is the local physical infrastructure. Physical infrastructure is more important for manufacturing than services. It is essential for supporting a modern economy. Goods and services cannot be produced and delivered without infrastructures for roads, electricity or internet. And moving people, if not more important, as moving goods. Investing more in roads, bridges and schools is an essential part of developing economies, and this is even more fundamental in developing countries when there is much more to be done than in advanced economies. Next we will see the women headed new enterprises. India's gender balance in entrepreneurship and startups remains among the lowest in the world. Empirical results suggest that the inadequate infrastructure affects women entrepreneurs more than men, because women are often responsible for a larger share of more time consuming activities. In particular, transport infrastructure and paved roads within villages play an important role. Travel in India can be restrictive and unpredictable, and women face greater constraints in geographic mobility imposed by safety concerns and social norms. In addition, the better electricity and water access may reduce the burden of women in providing essential household inputs for their families and allow them more free time to be directed towards their entrepreneurial activities. Next is the investment. The rupees 10,000 crore war chest, as managed by the Small Industries Development Bank of India, or SIDBI, was supposed to invest in venture capital funds, which in turn would invest in startups. However, not a single rupee has been disbursed yet. This is because the bank only puts 15% of the total corpus, while it is the venture capitalist that has to bring the remaining 85% to the table, and this year the venture capitalists have struggled to raise that kind of money. That has resulted in funding being reduced. Another problem was that the government had initially mandated that the venture capitalists could only use the money to fund early stage startups. This severely restricted the government's options to the venture capitalists, who went on to ignore the government's offer. Now the problem is that the startups are at various stages of development, and some are at the early stage of development and some are the mid or later stages of development. To restrict the venture capitalists to the early stage startups makes them more vulnerable to losses and bars them from investing in mid or later stage startups that have shown considerable improvement in their activities as well as their management. Next is the creation of a startup ecosystem. New incubators were to be set up across the country, but the progress has been sluggish in the creation of new incubators. It was only a few months back that some established incubators were selected to receive government's funding to scale up operations. While part of the lack of high level research and development in the country can be blamed on inadequate government funding and excessive regulation, private sector's failure to step up is also a problem. Lastly, the way forward. It is commendable that the government thought of startups as a separate category, recognizing their potential, and came out with a visionary plan to promote startups and their startup culture and entrepreneurship in India. While initiatives like startup certification, giving tax breaks to entrepreneurs, and setting up incubators and tinkering labs have been lauded, there is a lot more that could have been done. Now, the government could review the policy and make suitable changes and remove impediments and give a stronger impetus to startups, reduce the flight of successful startups to other jurisdictions or other countries. Now, remove the unnecessary bureaucratic interventions. And while the progress is slow, the ecosystem feels much supported as the government put on light their struggles and achievements. However, there is a lot more that can be done in programming and implementation of Startup India Action Plan. Thank you.